got ahead of myself. All right, here we go. So just very quickly, a couple points about the methodology of the survey. And then I promise I'll give you a few data points and we can have a discussion because I know it can be challenging with data. It's difficult to just sit here and have a whole bunch of numbers thrown at you, so it's good to be able to engage in that conversation. So the CII was designed and is administered by the HACR Research Institute. It's open to all Fortune 100 companies and HACR corporate member companies. We conduct it annually. Each year, companies are asked to answer a variety of questions that have to do with a number of different topics, including things like hiring practices, recruitment strategies, Hispanic board representation, and we've actually, in the last couple of years, created a pretty extensive procurement section. So asking things about how they're sourcing to Hispanic vendors, what are some of the challenges that they're facing in sourcing to Hispanic vendors, as well as looking at some of the numbers. So understanding the outcomes in terms of procurement. So since 2009, when the survey was launched, we've doubled our participation, which is great. We're excited. We want to continue to double moving forward. So in the last several years, we understand that it's become challenging for companies to want to be transparent. It's much more difficult when there's no apparent solution to what the problem is to continue to say, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. And so what we've decided to focus on at HACR is not just understanding that there is an issue, but trying to come up with creative solutions to that issue. So yesterday, for some of the participants who are here in attendance, we held a special session to talk about the survey, to talk about what changes need to be implemented in the survey, and to get some feedback, constructive feedback from the companies taking the survey as to what they would like to see from it and how it can better help them. So we're hoping that these changes, once implemented, will continue to grow the participation numbers in the survey. I just want to highlight for you, before we actually start talking about the data, the number of new participants that we've had over the years in the survey. So in 2009, our base year, we had 30 companies participate. The greatest level of participation the following year, 18 new companies, right? After that, we sort of saw new participation decrease. I think it becomes a little bit challenging when you're not sure, when you're afraid of what are they going to do with my data, how are they going to use these numbers. And so again, yesterday, with many thanks to those of you who were present for our session yesterday, we're hoping to be able to come up with a strategy that encourages new companies to participate, that eliminates that feeling of risk, that what's going to happen with my data? How are they going to use it? Who are they going to share it with? Well, in case you're wondering, we don't share it with anyone, and we don't release it publicly. In fact, if you pull out the report and you take a look at it, what we do release are companies' final ratings, and then the discussion around the different data points is based on the average. So the whole sample average, so that there are no data points that could be identified to a particular company. There's no risk that there's going to be a competitive advantage provided to one of your competitors if you participate and they don't. So we've tried our best to minimize risk for participating companies in the hopes that it will continue to encourage participation. So, what have we learned over the last couple of years? Well, in the past several years, we've seen measurable concrete improvements which amount to progress. Progress that's worthy of discussion, and that's what we're planning to do today. So what I'd like to do is talk about, again, selected trends within each one of the pillars. And as I'm talking about it, I think it would make for a better session if we actually engaged in conversation. So as I'm going through my points, if you have a question, you want to know how something was calculated, more information about it, please feel free to ask. There are Q&A mics in the room, and so there will be folks who are available to be able to come to you for your question. So let's see what we've learned and figure out where there's opportunity. So in both 2013 and 14, Hispanics accounted for nearly 14% of the total employee base for the sample of companies who participated in the CII. Hispanics were also more likely to be found in non-exempt positions as compared to exempt positions. Anyone think that there might be something challenging about that last point? Yes? No? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Offer their opinion? Is that a good data point? No. Why? Less skilled workers, perhaps no job security, maybe low pay, right? So if we're thinking about advancing the community generally, it's probably not so great for us to be more likely to be found in non-exempt positions than in exempt positions. So greater representation in these non-exempt positions could potentially lead to fewer Hispanics in the pipeline for the C-suite too. And we'll see that later on when we're talking about board representation and some of the numbers for executives. We're a lot less likely to be in those positions. So this is a point that I'd like to emphasize and that I think we should talk about. What can we do to increase representation in those positions that lead to the C-suite? I'm going to put you on the spot. Yesterday, you all had the opportunity to ask the panel and to put them on the spot about what their companies are doing. What are you going to do as an individual? Yep.
I think it would be really interesting to know the correlation between continual education within the corporation and the, I guess, advancement of Hispanics within the company. So like what kind of additional incentives do they have to help, maybe someone who is non-exempt who wants to become exempt, and how they invest in those employees to take them from one step to the other.
That's a great point. And I think that there are a lot of companies who have programs like that in place, right? So there's the possibility, and we know we hear success stories all the time. Several months ago, we interviewed Carlos Doubleday. Anyone know who Carlos Doubleday is? Okay. Carlos Doubleday was part of our Walmart Leadership Interview Series, and his story is really compelling. So he started out as an associate at Walmart and has been able to rise through the ranks. And so it happens. What we'd like to see is we'd like to encourage that to happen more. So perhaps working with companies to figure out what those plans look like. Is there a succession plan, not only for your exempt employees, but also for your non-exempt employees, and how can they transition from one role to the next role?
Is that a question over here?
Yeah.
It's more of a comment. It's more of a comment. I think that we can use our employee resource groups more effectively to do professional development within the membership of the groups. Because one thing you want to do is, if you don't have an opportunity to do the work you want to do within the company, you can do that work within the ERG and let yourself be seen doing the work, produce, and effectively put that on your resume when applying for another job within the company. So we challenge our membership, especially when it comes to project management, which seems to be something a lot of people are interested in, to volunteer to project manage one of our events or an effort that we have. In that, it gives them the exposure, the skills, and the opportunity to develop that and move forward with it. So that professional development, I think a lot of it belongs to the employee resource groups as well.
That's a great point. What company are you with?
AT&T.
AT&T. So you guys, your ERG is super well developed. It really, I think, has gotten to the point where, are you incorporated as your own 501c3? Yeah, so that's great that you guys offer that ability to your employees within your ERG. So are there any other companies who do that? Yeah, I see Cisco raising their hand in the back. Yep, Kroger I see, yep. Northrop Grumman, yeah, good. So, and you guys, you're with? Oh, yeah, okay, and you're with what company? Verizon Wireless. So I think we're seeing that companies are really starting to use their ERGs to not only foster the development of high potentials or folks that they'd like to invest some development into to get them through the pipeline, in addition to using it in some cases as a resource for business strategy. So there are a number of companies who are utilizing their groups to help with business initiatives, to help identify opportunities where they can get engaged. in the Hispanic community if they're not already there.
The question I have is a follow-up to the BRG conversation. What would be the value of actually going 501c3 as a nonprofit within a corporation? I'm just interested in understanding that because I'm with ADP and our group is a little bit younger, and some of these other groups have been around a little bit longer.
We have the benefit of being able to do fundraising for our scholarships without having it taxed.
And so we do fundraising throughout the year, and our main effort for fundraising is to provide scholarships to the Hispanic students in the community. And since we're a 501c3, all of our fundraising efforts are tax deductible.
So we'll talk about the importance of that when we talk about the philanthropy pillar. Say that 10 times fast. And we'll hear about how companies are utilizing their networks for volunteer opportunities, but that's a great point too, right? So a lot of what we have focused on in terms of philanthropy is how to prepare the Hispanic population to move into these positions that will be opening up in the near future. And part of that involves employee give back, right? Those volunteer hours, getting out there, and not only doing things like, public volunteer efforts, but getting in the community and helping with your professional knowledge, right? So there's tremendous value in using the knowledge that you have in your positions in corporate America to help students understand that that can be them, right? We heard that multiple times yesterday in our panel as well. And so I think it's really important to continue to echo some of these common themes that we're hearing as we have these conversations.
Hi, I lead the Hispanic network at our organization, and I have found that participation in the ERG is somewhat lower than some of the other, perhaps minority-focused ERGs. We also don't have very heavy participation in our mentoring or continuing education, so much less participation in that than maybe some of the other things, although I would agree that we probably have more Hispanics in non-exempt positions. I think what we've found is one of the barriers is the managers, and I know we touched on managers, the panel touched on management earlier, and we continue to think about how to deliver some sort of sensitivity training, and I know it's not specific to Hispanics, but but all sorts of other minorities in the organization. So I think sensitivity training or some type of program around that is probably next up for us.
Okay. And what company are you with, if you don't mind sharing? If you
Capital
don't want to
One.
share, it's okay. What is it?
Capital One.
Capital One. Okay. So I want to talk to you after, because there's a lot of academic research that looks at the value of sensitivity programs and other types of diversity programming for employees and their success. So grab me after so we can talk about it. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Ana Luisa Mendoza with Northrop Grumman. One of the things that we do at our company to help with that issue that you just mentioned, it's provide events, especially our ERG events on times that are convenient for non-exempt employees. One more thing I wanted to touch on was one thing that all of us as companies can do is provide awareness to our training that is available internally to our companies. Also, Northrop Grumman offers educational assistance, and that's something that entices employees to participate because it's free to them to take those classes.
Okay. So educational assistance is actually something we should come back and talk about maybe when we're in the philanthropy section. I'd be interested to hear how that works and to figure out what's the assistance for? Is it for like a certification? Is it for college courses, like advanced? Sure. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the other trends that we observed in terms of the employment data. So we took a look at hiring rates and we took a look at attrition rates. So the average hiring rate for Hispanics in 2013 was 13%. In 2014, it was 12%. Any statisticians out here? Okay, I'll tell you, they're not necessarily statistically significant, so it's more or less staying consistent. So what's more concerning, however, is the average attrition rate, right? So what do you see there? The average attrition rate in 2016 or 2013 was 16%. In 2014, it was 19%. That is a big difference.
Now, attrition means that they left on their own?
They left on their own. So what's concerning here? The image of a revolving door here, right? So for every new Hispanic you're bringing in, at least one is also leaving. 1 point something, yeah, 1 point something is actually leaving. So if it were me, I'd want to take a closer look at what's happening here, because that means I'm almost continually onboarding somebody. Does that seem effective? No, yeah. I think there's a question back here.
Yeah, I actually have a comment and a question. So I was 25 years at corporate America, and when I launched a national program, one of the things that I found is we had to have a program that actually taught diversity, but cultural understanding, because somebody is different than you doesn't mean that they can't be as successful. And realistically, most of our company's senior management is Caucasian. And if your behavior is not exactly like theirs, they may misinterpret the things that you do because you're not like them. And so that's one of the things that we found we had to do. The other thing is you have to create programs where your lower level managers and succession planning has sponsors within the organization, because if they don't have those sponsors that are actually committed to those careers, and a sponsor is different than a mentor. A mentor is somebody that agrees to meet with you occasionally. A sponsor is somebody that actually brings you forward within the organization. Now that I'm in the nonprofit world, I meet with a lot of groups within organizations, and what they continuously tell me, a lot of companies have, Hispanic groups, they have the different ethnic groups, but what they constantly tell me is that they don't have full support of senior management. They don't have sponsors within their organization that are actually committed to succession planning and their success. In addition to that, when positions open up at higher levels, they are not fully considered for those positions, and when they apply, they're not getting the feedback that they need to tell them what needs to change or what they need to do differently. So having said that, my question to some of the companies here are specifically, what are you guys doing to help create sponsors for our Latinos within these companies, and what are you guys actually doing to help with the succession planning? Because the revolving door is not going to help us be successful, and right now we have a lot of people that are retiring in companies, and I don't know about you, but I don't see people that look like us filling those senior level positions.
So great point. Great point. And I want to make a couple comments on some of the things that you said. So I think it's really interesting. We did a study a couple years ago looking at generational differences, looking at some of our program participants and trying to understand what the difference was for folks who were millennials versus folks who were like baby boomers or traditionalists or even Gen X in terms of how they navigate the corporate workspace. And not surprisingly, it's different, right? And so part of that, in addition to the issue about race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, all the different protected classes, it's impacting. And I don't know that anybody has really found a one-size-fits-all solution to help companies overcome that. So I think, we need to focus on trying to come up with strategies that can be applicable. And again, let's have a conversation afterwards if you're open to it about the same issue we were talking about before, about the diversity programs, the sponsored initiatives or trainings on sensitivity, and the effect that actually can have in corporate America. Even though we think it might be great, there may be other options that might be better. So,
Lisette?
Yes.
Over here.
Oh,
Sorry.
hey.
First of all, thank you for all the tremendous work you do. I really appreciate all your work. Let's give her a round of applause. Alma Crossley with General Motors, and I just wanted to add a couple of comments because a couple of things that we've been doing at General Motors that have been successful with respect to some of our Hispanic employees. Number one, I don't know if anybody, most of you were at the reception last night, but Ken Barrett, our Chief Diversity Officer, provided a couple of statistics, and one being that at the tail end of last year, we ended up interviewing 100 folks at a particular event and hiring in extended offers and ended up with like 35 full-time new engineers. And of course, they were all Hispanic,
That's
and we we're
great.
very excited. But one of the things you've just very talked about is how do we make sure they are culturally comfortable as they come into General Motors. A lot of these young people are coming from all across the country. You're coming to Detroit. You don't really know the atmosphere. You don't really know the community. So one of the things that we did was leverage our employee resource group. And we have extended out to them. We got them in from SHIP because that's the convention that was taking place, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And we tagged them shipmates. And what we do is we have these events and we bring them in and we connect with them and we have Hispanic executives come in and then we talk to them about the community, different events. So not only from a social networking, but also mentoring them and so forth. Another thing that we're doing moving forward is we have a group that we started actually in October of 2013 is the Hispanic Leadership Network. And we have a group of all Hispanic executives that get together and our main mission is to develop, mentor, and retain new talent. And we've started a mentoring program offered up through the ERG, but also working with some of the high potentials across the country to see how we can help support them. And it's not just Hispanic executives that mentor. We actually reach out to our contacts throughout the company, and because obviously you want other than just Hispanics mentoring you. So those are some of the things that we've been doing to try to develop our Hispanic talent, and I think we are starting to see success from it. But just wanted to throw out a couple ideas.
Thanks, Alma. So I think we can't sort of bypass the importance of employee networks, employee resource groups in part of this process. I mean, it really serves as an incubator for your talent. And if the companies utilize it the right way, you can really see people who are going to progress through the pipeline through that employee resource group participation. So they're really crucial, I think, for development.
Just a quick question. Does the study say why are Hispanics leaving?
You know, we didn't ask that question. We haven't asked it before because it's the company who's filling it out, not the individuals who are leaving. So unless the company asks that as part of an exit process, I don't know that we'd have access to that data. But it is something that we could check on.
Quick question regarding the recommendation around certified diversity recruiters. Can you speak a little bit about that? And is there a specific certification or training that these recruiters are going through?
Yeah, so we actually heard from a couple companies that they work with a specific one. I won't publicly give them a plug, but if you'd like, I can share that with you afterwards. So there are a number of certified diversity recruiting companies out there. They provide training. Sometimes it's training to your HR folks so that they are better equipped to be able to recruit diverse talent. Sometimes, depending on the firm, it's about trying to connect you with talent that they've identified that may be good for your company. So it just varies depending on the need of the company. But certainly we think a multi-pronged approach is really going to be effective for recruitment and retention. So it's things like working with professional organizations like Alma was talking about to bring them in, and then working with your network to keep them there, right? So there is a lot that we could say about the transition from one company to the next, from a recent college grad to their first full-time job, from leaving home for the first time and not being around your family to ending up in some place where there might not be any other folks who look like you in the community and in your workplace, right? So there are lots of factors that could be impacting the decision to leave, in addition to really just not fitting into the culture. And so it's about understanding what all of those different things are and trying to improve as best we can the things that we can control, which is the culture within our companies, right? There's not a lot we can do about the external factors.
Sorry to keep you on this slide.
It's okay.
So kind of in relation to what he was talking about, or what somebody else asked about, where these Hispanics are going, I'm wondering how this number compares to non-Hispanics. So if everybody's attriting at 16 or 19%, then I don't know that it's significant. And then my other comment or question is, how are you defining Hispanic? Because what I see in my organization, and I don't think it's specific to Capital One by any stretch, is that 2/3 of the people around the table at any time, while they identify as Hispanic, will not identify as Hispanic on their EEOC requirements when they apply, and that's how we know who's Hispanic.
Huh, interesting. So it's optional, right? You don't have to if you don't want to. So we use the government definition of what is Hispanic, and so we're relying, because it's not us, we collect the data, but it's data that the companies have already collected. We just kind of put it all together. So I don't know within our companies if it is self-identified, if it's that some other way that it's been identified as Hispanic. That's certainly a question for us to look into and for us to figure out. In terms of the attrition rate, so the number is considerably lower for the total population, and then if you look at it for multiple groups, it's lower as well. So Hispanics have a higher attrition rate at this point in this sample, right? So great question, though. All right, so again, just want to underscore a couple takeaway points here. You need to leverage those strategic partnerships. I don't think I'm saying anything that shouldn't be obvious, right? It should be obvious to you that that's what you need to do here. There are lots of professional organizations that you can work with. They're really helpful for identifying that top talent, for bringing that top talent in, and as we heard with our example this morning from General Motors, in keeping that talent and pushing them through the pipeline as best as they can, right? So that in combination with things like working with certified diversity recruiters, with a focus perhaps on retention, right? Because the issue here is the attrition rate. We're trying to figure out ways of combating that attrition rate so that we can deal with that leaky pipeline issue. So let's talk a little bit about procurement. So the average US-based procurement spend for the sample in 2013 was $20 billion. In 2014, it was $30 billion. And the average spend with Hispanic suppliers was $600 million in 2013 and $800 million in 2014. Anything standing out at you? A little disproportionate, maybe? Yeah. So a little disproportionate here in terms of what the total spend is and what the spend is with Hispanic suppliers. If you actually calculate the proportion, the percentage, it's like between 4 and 5% or something of total US-based procurement spend is what's spent with Hispanic suppliers. Now, there are a number of things happening here, and we're going to delve into them as best as we can today. But soon our procurement report will be coming out. There are certainly challenges to these large multinational companies working with small vendors. And there are certainly challenges on the part of the vendor. So yesterday in the session, we were sort of trying to tackle this because this is one of our most challenging areas. And there was quite a bit of frustration on the part of some companies in talking about when they had finally found a Hispanic vendor who could handle the capacity that their company required, there's issues with access to capital. And then that company needs to go and get capital from another source in order to continue to be able to produce their product. And then all of a sudden, they're no longer classified as a minority business, right? Because they've gotten just 1 percentage point too much, right, in the wrong direction. And so that's a challenge, right? It's a challenge here that we need to figure out a way of dealing with, right? There are a lot of sharp minds in this room, and I'm sure if we were all able to come together, we'd figure out a way for dealing with the issue, the issues that we're facing in procurement. I think the other issue that we need to talk about too, because this paints kind of a bleak picture, but if I tell you that this is actually a positive for us, because for the first time, we're getting a majority of companies to actually share their procurement data with us. We spent several years where companies just weren't willing to share that. So as bad as the numbers may look, it's a win for us as an organization because we're actually able to have the conversations now with companies about what's happening and understand what their challenges are. In the past, we had no idea what was happening because they weren't willing to share, and so we were kind of operating blindly. But now we know, right? We know what some of the challenges are. We know what some of the issues are. Another issue that I think is worth mentioning when we're talking about procurement has to do with spend that is actually under the control of the Supplier Diversity Office. And I don't know how other to phrase that, and it's kind of a difficult concept sometimes to wrap your head around. So I'm sure you all know every company has like fixed, and I'm not a money person, so if I don't use the right terminology, I'm going to apologize in advance. But there are expenses that you have no control over as a company. For the most part, there are some of those. And then there are some expenses that you do have control over. So we would consider that an opportunity for you to be able to work with a diverse supplier. The ones that you have no control over because they're kind of fixed, and I don't mean that fixed in any way that it might mean for those of you who are money people or financial people. I just mean that you have to use a certain vendor, you have to buy a certain supply, you have to stock certain products on your shelves in your stores, right? Those things are outside the control of the office that has been charged with diversifying your supplier pool. So that's a challenge that we have to figure out how to overcome. It's an opportunity for us to, again, think creatively about solutions and to come up with a way that perhaps we can still increase supplier diversity within the constraints that we're given. Questions, comments? Yeah.
You know, the reality is, I'm Robert Barber, Latina South. The reality is that most Hispanic businesses are not equipped to be able to do business with corporate America. They just don't have the size or the capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So the way for corporate America to effectively reach, I think, is just demand from their suppliers, the top suppliers, to include a minority supplier component in their level, whether it is the first tier, if that's too big still, included in the second tier. That way you can groom them and maybe even graduate them eventually to be able to be a top supplier. But you know, we produce a program for Latina business owners all over the country. And we've been doing this since 1998. And in all these years, over 32,000 businesses. I can count on one hand the companies that are, you know, that have the capacity to deal directly with corporate America. So unless the corporate America procurement office brings their top suppliers or the second tier suppliers to the table and create some kind of incentive for them to be able to have minority suppliers as part of their package, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So it's a great point, Robert, and I think it's something that we've started to look at. So more recently, we've asked companies not only to tell us about what's happening in terms of their total spend, but to actually break it down for us and tell us what's happening at the different tiers so that we can better understand what exactly is happening and if there is a way for us to be able to help in some way to encourage greater supplier diversity.
I guess my comment would be that I think that some companies have done well with supplier diversity, and it's not the companies that have had the simplest procurement needs. AT&T types is on the top of the charts on the HACR Corporate Inclusion Index. They've done it phenomenally well with their Latino spend, and they're a tech company, so it's not the easiest company in the world to do business with. So I think if there's a will, there's a way, and I think what I believe that we need to do is to make sure that people better connect the spend with the company's bottom line. If you're going to do business with the Latino community, you should be ensuring that your procurement spend is commensurate with the type of representation that you want in the Hispanic population. So what I think our challenge is at HACR is to figure out how to make sure we're communicating which companies are doing well on the procurement piece and the other measures, of course, and which companies aren't.
Thanks. So procurement has been something that we've been looking at for the last couple of years, and we actually are getting ready to release a report about procurement. And part of the issue, I think, has been exactly what Robert is saying. There's a challenge in finding folks who are able to handle the capacity. And then like Brent mentioned, there are companies who have been able to figure that out. And especially in terms of the direction that, again, the projected job growth is going in the US and the needs that we're going to have moving forward, high tech is really big. And it's not just an issue, an opportunity for companies in terms of their employee base. It's also an opportunity for growth for communities who are entrepreneurial, right? And so that, I think, becomes a challenge. And yes, AT&T has done it very well. We had a panel last year on procurement, focused on procurement specifically, and we had an AT&T person on the panel talking about all of the different things that they've done and how they've been able to creatively find solutions to what are some of these challenges. So I think it's possible. I think we just have to sit down and really think about the best ways to overcome what some of these challenges may be. And I'll share with you another story from a company who talked to us at length about the challenges that they were facing in terms of supplier diversity and what they decided to do about it. So they were having difficulty with finding a supplier for one of their main products for the thing that they're known for. Right? Because I don't want to give it away, right? So the thing that they're known for, they were having difficulty finding a supplier who could help them with that. So they decided that it was in their best interest to actually work with a small Hispanic-owned firm and develop them, give them the tools that they needed to be able to handle the capacity that they required. It was a better investment of their dollars to bring this business along with them than to try and find somebody else who could do it. And so that's a case where we'd like to see that happening more. And we are starting to see it. So in the procurement report, we talk about things that companies are doing in terms of trying to develop Hispanic-owned businesses to be able to handle the capacity that they require. So there's things like mentoring programs, there are things like educational resources that are provided, there are special programs and matching events, right? How many of you knew that some companies sponsor fairs to match suppliers with companies? Right. So the one hand that goes up in the back of the room. So I mean, companies really are trying to engage. We just kind of need to push them along a little bit farther. We need to get them going down that right path, because I think that as the US population continues to diversify, the census is projecting that we're going to see the greatest growth in businesses owned by Hispanic females moving forward. And so we need to find a way to integrate those businesses into corporate America at a quicker rate, but at a rate that still allows them to be successful. Because the last thing that we want to do is integrate a minority-owned business into a company and then have them fail. Because all that does is reinforce what some perceptions that are out there that people have about their ability to handle the capacity that these companies require. I think I saw a hand back here. Yeah.
But for those who do, one of the thoughts that I had, excuse me, thank you. I'm not assuming that this would explain everything, but do we also think that some of the suppliers may underbid themselves to get the business and therefore also driving down the total spend?
I guess it's possible, right? I don't know how we'd be able to get at that in terms of our data, because again, it's sort of coming to us secondhand, so I don't know if. Let me think about it. Let me think about it, Jennifer, and see if we can maybe put our heads together and come up with something. I don't know if companies would have, I mean, yeah. I mean, I suppose in theory it's possible, right? They're underbidding to get the bid and they win it, and then that is affecting total spend, right? I don't know how often that's happening. My concern in the underbidding piece, though, is they're underbidding to get it, and then they get it, and then they don't do well with it. Yeah, then that's the cycle just kind of goes around and around. Yeah.
I just want to comment on getting back to UPS. organization, for example, has a piece that is for supplier diversity. So we do provide for supplier diversity or vendors to bid on. That means that not that they get in front of the line, but they are in front of the line, and they have less to compete against the regular mainstream vendors. So to answer that question over there is compete in the same diversity market. So they get a chunk, we have a chunk that goes to diversity suppliers. And that's who we're going to purchase from. We want more, obviously, but they will compete within that space.
Huh. That's interesting. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like is it like, if you think about like how diverse slates, that's the term I learned yesterday in our group, diverse slates work for open, say, executive level positions. It's kind of like a similar concept, but for supplier diversity? Huh, okay. I want to talk to you after.
Yeah, just a comment. One to Frank Lopez, I'm with Alpha. Want to congratulate you and HACR for the years in doing the index, because one of the gentlemen that was in the panel, one of the panels yesterday, put it very succinctly, which is, in God we trust, everything else we measure. And I think the fact that you are giving us, this audience, individually and collectively, the ability to understand the trends and where to be more impactful as we can, I think that's key. But to that point also, one of the things that individually, I think in your point before your question, you asked what can we do individually in addition to what we can do through our companies and our enterprises or businesses and the rest. And that is, again, on the measure side, which companies and corporations do very well, is on the purchasing power. We can speak with our purchasing. We could have that direct to those that are doing well and that are responding favorably to the Latino community. We invest in them. We purchase their products. We enter their stores. They understand that very well. If we don't, they'll understand it very well and make the adjustments, because if there's a will, there's a way, and the will is principally driven by the purchasing power that they perceive we have and how we use it.
Thank you. That's a great point. I want to highlight something that's on the bottom of the slide quickly, and then we've got a comment over here and a comment over there. So I want to highlight this last part of this sentence. With the goal of helping them work on their business, not in their business. It was something that one of our participating companies said to us. So they engage in all kinds of mentorship with their suppliers. They engage in programs, and they have different events that they sponsor, they host to try and increase supplier diversity. But their focus is on helping that Hispanic entrepreneur develop their business and not just be part of the business, not be within the business. And I think that that's a point that sometimes gets overlooked, and I think we need to focus on it more. It's like the story from the Bible, right? Give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. It's kind of the same idea here, right? So we want to encourage companies to be working with these Hispanic entrepreneurs to give them the skills that they need to continue their business for the rest of their life, right? Not to be in their business. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jorge Ferraz from Latino Leaders Magazine. I have two questions. One, on the previous slide, when you said the proportion of Hispanic suppliers or diversity suppliers for a company, is there any ratio that some companies should follow on the proportion of diversity suppliers? Should that reflect their market of consumers? Should that even be even more or less? And the second question goes to, I see the effort, and I see everybody just convinced on the diversity is necessary and something that you need to have in your corporation. But is there any effort promoting or publishing the benefits of the corporations when they become diverse, both in workforce, in diversity, in supplies diversity, in every level? Because I mean, I see that still a very small group of corporate America is understanding diversity, and the larger part is still like not getting it yet. So I mean, if corporate America is all about results and money, maybe benefits, actual benefits from the ones who have converted or the ones who have or embraced the diversity will be more convincing to these corporations?
So great questions. I'm going to do the second question first and then come back to the first question. So there's academic research that looks at the impact of diversity and a number of different things within companies. And I think that what research is really telling us is it's kind of mixed. There are some academic studies that say, yes, diversity has this positive impact on your bottom line. And there are some that say, well, we haven't quite been able to figure it out yet. And so I think because there isn't consensus in the academic research, I think that's why corporate America is kind of still lagging behind. That's my personal opinion there. I'm just going to qualify that. So I think what we need to do is conduct more research, right? I'm going to plug my own self here, right? We need to conduct more research. We need to get in there and we need to understand what's happening more thoroughly because there just hasn't been enough for us to be able to say definitively one way or the other. I think we all have our own opinion about it, and certainly I'm happy to share my opinion with you after the session. But my opinion is just that, my opinion. Until I have something behind it, something to back it up, you know, it's just going to stay that. To the other point that you made, the first question about the number of suppliers. So we talked about this yesterday in our CII participant session as well. And, you know, is there value in one company who spends billions of dollars or millions of dollars with one Hispanic supplier? Is that value better than the company that spends maybe less money but is spreading it out, distributing it more evenly around the community? I don't know the answer to that question yet. I think we need to take a closer look at it. I think we need to better understand it. I mean, it's easy to say that the company that spends, you know, $5 billion with one vendor is doing a great job. I mean, it's $5 billion with one vendor. But what's the impact of that one vendor on the community at large? So I think there are different ways of looking at it, and depending on how you look at it will depend on how you answer that question.
Doctora, to take a look at this academic research and maybe to turn the research around, to flip it, to echo on what you said about the corporation's bottom line, their financial performance, do you take a look at these companies and see what percentage of their bottom line is sold to Latinos or is as a result of Latino buying power?
So we haven't, but it's certainly a direction that we're thinking about moving. But in this particular survey and in this particular data set, we don't look at anything like that. In fact, we don't even ask companies for that type of information. We do have access to some of that information from the Fortune list, but it doesn't give you specific details as to what percentage of their revenue, say, is coming from the Hispanic market versus all other markets. So we're not there yet, but maybe in the near future we'll be there. Can I just get a time check? What time is it? 10:15. Okay, great. So we'll take a couple more questions here and then we'll move on. Oh, someone has a microphone. Oh, hold on one second. Someone has a microphone.
I had an idea that we implemented at Northrop Grumman. I'm the chair for the Hispanic Employee Resource Group at Northrop Grumman, and something that our ERG did was that we got engaged in the supplier diversity initiative, and we brought in connection with your local Chamber of Commerce, brought in some suppliers to educate them on the, how they could get involved and become more, provide products to Northrop Grumman in the certain areas that we needed. And, we heavily participated in that and making sure that we did a follow-up. And it's an initiative that we're now trying to implement across different areas where our company has, in conjunction with our strategic sourcing department.
So that means it worked. It worked well?
Yes, it does, and it's a way for employee research groups that are looking to impact the bottom line and add to the business. Is a way for you to actually do that, getting involved in that educational process and bringing in the suppliers to your company.
So great suggestion.
Kirk Whistler, Latino Print Network. Great information that you're sharing. If I'm reading on the lower left-hand side correctly, last year, the average Fortune 500 company that you surveyed was procuring from 231 different Latino corporations.
Some more, some less.
Yeah, obviously, because that's the average. So that's a much higher figure than I've ever heard before. Have you looked at overlap at all amongst those? Because you take that 231 times 60 or whatever, that's a sizable number of Latino companies. It'd be interesting to see how much overlap there is, because that pool is certainly much larger than initially might have been thought.
Yeah, so that's a great point. We don't actually ask the companies to give us information on who those suppliers are. So there's no way for us to know if any two companies are using the same supplier so that it's doubling up. But it's a great point, and certainly something we can think about. I don't know how willing companies would be to share that information with us, but it never hurts to ask, right? The worst they can say is no. Yeah.
I'm Ruben Schaefer. I have responsibility for supplier diversity, workforce diversity, and associate resource groups at the Kroger Company. We do business with both minority and female and suppliers, both first and second tier. One of the things that we are doing at Kroger is exploring our supplier agreements so that we can introduce language with our first tier suppliers in the importance of doing business with second-tier suppliers, both as far as minorities and as far as females are concerned.
So it's an interesting point. Is there any companies here who'd be willing to share if they have language like that in their Tier 1 supplier agreements? Huh, you guys have it. Can I say where you're from? Target. So Target has that. Do you find that that's increased representation in Tier 2 then?
I don't know if we've looked directly at the correlation, but we've newly started adding it to our contracts.
Yeah. So we haven't looked at I'm Jessica Lozano Williams from Target. We haven't looked at a correlation between an increase in our Tier 2 reporting and to see if it's correlated to adding that to our contracts, but we just started doing that to more of our contracts, so I think it will be something we look at more closely.
Also Tarek from Target. I think the other piece that's important here from that perspective is it becomes just part of doing business rather than an extra step in how we're doing business, like supplier diversity is over here and the rest of procurement's over here. It's about integrating them together, so it's all about the routine that you have.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and it's not something that we put on the slides, but we also asked companies about their supplier diversity plan and how integrated that is throughout the business, and you'd be surprised how unintegrated or non-integrated those plans actually are. So it's like supplier diversity is happening here, and everything else is happening over here, which I think doesn't necessarily make for good business, right? You need supplier diversity to be in the same places that everything is happening if the program is going to be successful. So that's something to think about, or something to continue to focus on or talk on. This is certainly an area where there are challenges, but there is a lot of opportunity here, and we don't know enough about it yet. We need to continue to do more research in this area, come up with additional best practices. I think we've heard a couple here that certainly are worth exploring to determine if they're going to work for your individual company. But I think there is certainly opportunity here for us to figure out better ways for companies to engage with the growing entrepreneurial market that is going to be, if the census is right, predominantly Hispanic females. So let's move into talking a little bit about philanthropy. So if we think about the way the demographics of the US are going to be changing, we already know, I'm going to keep saying it, the Hispanic population is growing. I'm sure you've heard it all lots of times before. So we need to think about how to care for this population. This is the population that corporate America is going to be relying on as time passes to fill those new job opportunities, to replace those retiring workers, right? The Hispanic population is also much younger than the Caucasian population. It's much younger than all of the other groups, and it's the fastest growing, right? So we need to understand what's happening here. We need to devote resources into this community to ensure that they have the skill set that you guys are going to need, right? This is your future workforce. You're going to be relying on them to continue to grow your company, to continue to give you that competitive advantage. So what we've seen in the last 2 years is that Hispanic give has increased, right? We went from an average of 9 million to just over 15 million. Proportionately, it's just about 5 to 7% of overall philanthropic give with companies. So we're doing okay, right? Could we be doing better? Yeah, of course, right? There's always opportunity for us to do better. And in just a moment, we'll talk about other ways that companies are engaging with the community. But I think I saw someone with a mic right here. Yeah.
Yeah, Doctor. Eric Rodriguez with Intel. And I know we're trying to wrap up philanthropy and talk about governance. My question more goes around culture. How do we measure culture in our companies? Because when we talk about strategy, we all know that culture will just eat strategy alive, especially in corporate America. And the reason why I ask this is because, like I shared yesterday in one of my questions, I have a 16-month-old son. And I was reflecting last night, I wonder what it'll be in the 60-year anniversary of ACED if my son comes to this conference. And I don't know how I would feel about that. And say, why do we still have ACED in 30 years from now if we're talking about this? So how do we implement these type of numbers in our corporations, but how do we implement them to change our culture? So when ACED turns 60 years, this is a smaller room, and we don't, we're not talking about this anymore. So it's mostly about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more into governance. But how do we take that to change our culture?
So it's a good question. Obviously, as a HACR employee, I hope HACR is still around in 30 years. But, I don't know. I think there's probably always going to be a need, and let me qualify my personal opinion. I think we're individuals, and individuals are going to be individuals. There was a session we did the other day where it sort of went into this conversation about unconscious bias and how unconscious bias impacts what happens in the workplace. And how many people know the phrase unconscious bias? Okay, so maybe we need to do a session on unconscious bias next year. So, just saying. So I think, it's, in my opinion, it's probably unfortunate that it's a lot harder to change culture because it's a group of individuals who are coming together. There was a great article in Harvard Business Review like maybe 3 or 4 months ago where it was a number of different CEOs giving their opinions on diversity and why diversity is important for their company. And I think that's key, right? Like I think that if you want to see culture change, that commitment has to come from the top. And you need to have your CEOs openly, willingly engaging in conversations about it, openly and willingly doing things differently than perhaps their peers are doing. Because if that doesn't happen, it's very hard to force it from the ground up, right? It's a lot easier to have it go from the top down. So I'd say that's probably my initial response to your question. I'm sure if I had more time to think about it, I'd probably come up with additional things. But I think, I can't say that that's not important. It has to come from the top down, and it has to be more than just, a memo that gets issued. There have to be real actions behind it and a real commitment behind it for people at all the different levels to also buy into it. And that's what the article in the Harvard Business Review was talking about. It was talking about the commitment that these CEOs have made and how much of a priority it is. It's become priority one for them because they recognize that they need it and their culture doesn't support it, and so they're trying to make the change. I don't know if anyone has a mic, but I'm going to go over.
Thank you. Hi, Evelyn Dixon again with AT&T. I agree with you 100% in terms of that culture and leadership. It does have to start at the top. So within AT&T, of course, it is a commitment from our senior leadership, not only in words, but in actions. So your leaders have to be visible, supporting D&I initiatives. It also has to be built into your overall operating plan, not just as a sidebar, something off on the side. It has to be a part of the operating plan. Therefore, the senior leaders and those beneath will realize the importance of it, and it also needs to be built into your senior leaders' compensation packages. Okay, hit them in the pocketbook. It's going to matter. It's going to matter. In terms of measuring, I agree with you. I think it's going to be something that there's always going to be a need for diversity and inclusion and training and sensitivity and unconscious bias. I am actually in the middle of creating unconscious bias workshops for our senior leaders. So that the commitment has to start from the top down. And I mean, that's the only way that that culture is going to get down into the organization. You measure it through employee engagement surveys. You build in diversity and inclusion component to those surveys. That's a key component as well in terms of measuring it.
Thank you. So earlier we were talking about the dollar amounts that were contributed to the philanthropic organizations in the community. And recently we started asking about volunteer hours and whether or not companies are tracking that. Are companies assigning a dollar value to that, right? So these are some of the questions that we've been asking in the last year or so. And we find that there are a few companies who are doing both of those things at this point. We have a handful of companies who are tracking hours and assigning a dollar value to it. Why do you think that I would be forcing this dollar value to your hours issue? Is it important? Do we care? We care, right? Or at least we should care about assigning a dollar value to the volunteer hours. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the financial contribution that you're making to the community, it's about the human capital contribution that you're making to the community. Each and every one of you is a leader in your own right, and you have knowledge that you can share with the community. And that is worth something, or at least it should be worth something to your company, especially when we're talking about executives volunteering in the community, executives speaking, working with kids or college students, whatever level it might be. So this is certainly an area where we'd like to see more companies following up with this. There's real opportunity here in terms of understanding what's happening in the community. The other piece of it is that we actually started asking specifically about the Hispanic ERG to see how companies were utilizing it and to see if they're really the ones that are driving the initiatives within the Hispanic community more generally. So level of data that is still not readily available for all companies. They're not tracking it at quite the level that we need, the specifics that we need, but we're hoping to encourage companies to do it because it's important for us to know, are these initiatives that are being led by our ERGs, what role is this ERG playing in the community, what is the impact of that? That's another big one. So we started asking last year, whether or not there were measures in place to assess the impact of your corporate and foundation giving and of the community hours, the volunteer hours. There are very few companies, and I was surprised by this, who actually have measures in place to evaluate the impact of the initiatives that they're funding. Is anyone else surprised by that? No? You guys aren't surprised by that? I was surprised by that, right? Like, you're giving millions of dollars away and there's no mechanism in place to evaluate the impact that it's had? Does that sound like good business sense? I don't think it sounds like good business sense, but I'm not in the business world. So from the nonprofit side, we're always constantly asked to evaluate things and to figure out how effective certain programs or initiatives have been. I can't believe the corporate world is actually behind the nonprofit world on this. Yeah.
Hi, Katie Fessler from Altria. To that point, Lisette, I think, so speaking for Altria's philanthropy program, we do have a pretty robust evaluation program in place, and it's to the outcomes that are stated for the program. So if it's youth development, they're youth development outcomes. They are inclusive of recipients of those services who are Hispanic and
But no way to
African American
break it out, right?
and a whole bunch of other people, because it's in 10 cities and it's in the parts of those cities where the need is. And so the question is a resource allocation one against if the outcomes are really supposed to be for the community level need. That need is going to be inclusive of people who identify as Hispanic, but we're not going to break it out that way. So it's one thing to say there are not evaluation mechanisms, but to say there aren't just because they don't accrue to a Hispanic metric is an incomplete logic stream. So I wanted to.
So thank you for pointing
make
it
that
out.
clear.
We talked about it yesterday, right? Yesterday afternoon, that sometimes the level of detail that we're asking for as an organization is much more granular than what companies have or have the ability to give us. So yes. So when it comes to evaluating the impact of initiatives in the Hispanic community, those are the metrics that companies are really having a hard time giving us because it's such a finite level or such a small level of detail that we're asking. There may be a metric that evaluates the program or the initiatives that they have sort of generally, but for us, for our specific area of interest, it's difficult to find companies who are doing that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Linda Filosa from State Farm. I'm an attorney for in-house counsel, and one of our programs that I was specifically involved with was going to an elementary school in the Bronx. I'm from New York, in case you didn't tell. And I specifically sat down with 4 to 5 children, and I was assigned to them for all intents and purposes. We spoke about home life. We spoke about how where they are, they're not happy, beyond their control, unhappy, and all I did was give them hope. Now, the metric in evaluating the effectiveness, I have one child that made it to the honor roll. I have one child that made it into a competitive high school. I can't put that into words, how happy I am. I have a picture of him by my office, I really do. And if that helps, what we do, anything that we do, I know when it comes to children, it does help. I don't know if we're putting a number on things, but I don't want to stop any initiatives just because metrics aren't showing their evaluation and their effectiveness. Because I think with children, there is, even if we get one through the system, one that understands it, I think we're really making progress.
So, thank you. It's a great point, and one that we're trying to figure out a way of determining what's an appropriate evaluation metric. So this is something we just piloted last year, and we've now started engaging in conversations with folks to try and figure out the best way to assess it. I think it's sort of a challenge generally. I had a call a couple weeks ago with a company who's wanting to create an evaluation mechanism for some of the programs that they're funding. And we were talking about things like, well, should we have a behavioral evaluation? And because it's a program that's meant to address change in attitudes and things. And I said, well, how are you going to have your volunteers assess whether or not this person's behavior has actually changed or been impacted in some way based on this program that you're planning to launch? Because after all, they're volunteers. It's not like they're trained psychologists or something that would be able to give like an informed assessment of whether or not someone's behavior has changed. So I think there are lots of nuances that have to be figured out. But I certainly would want to encourage companies to be thinking about that, like this company that I had the call with a couple weeks ago, because we want to know. We want to know, if all of the work that you're doing in the community is having an impact, if it's being successful. Because if it isn't, then maybe we can help you come up with a different strategy or help to identify areas of opportunity. So how many people know what HIP is? Hispanics in Philanthropy. It's a nonprofit organization that has a report from a couple years ago talking about where there was, where they were having challenges, right? Like companies are having challenges working with nonprofits because those nonprofits were having difficulty identifying where there was opportunity for them to engage. So I think maybe this is about a synergy here, some kind of partnership where we can connect companies with nonprofits who maybe have something in place and ready to go.
Hi, just a comment really. Samantha Maldonado, Northwestern Mutual. Regarding a lot of the points that you've made, we've actually had a lot of those implemented within the foundation. They actually have 3 communities in Milwaukee that they've identified as key areas of focus. And before they just give them willingly the money, they have to really receive like a strategy or an operating plan from those communities to say, I'm not just giving it to you, how are you really going to implement these measures so you have a return, so you actually can sustain it yourself. To that point, also, within the Hispanic ERG, I'm the governance team and the membership chair, we are also using our membership in regards to getting involved with these said communities. So one of those community events we do is Time to Read. So a good proportionate number of our membership is involved in this program of going to a local charter school and reading to these 3rd and 7th graders on a weekly basis for months at a time, and you can truly see these relationships build, testimonials of these children that have been impacted by this relationship from someone in corporate America who they can actually see is making strides and pushing themselves forward of affinities that they can really connect with. And also then, I think I lost my last point, but it's really that you can see that trending happen. And it's really having that strategy being very clear within our governance regarding strategy training. So what are really our key areas of focus, community, career, all of that. And having our executive sponsors of our our affinity groups be of a different affinity truly, because they can then give a different perspective and help build in that operating plan and those strategies within your own organization.
So that's a great point, and I want to talk to you after because I want to hear about that evaluation mechanism and the whole having a strategic plan piece. After.
Good morning, Lisette.
Hi, Ron.
I'm Ron Parker. I'm the President and CEO of the Executive Leadership Council, and I am a 30-year retired employee from PepsiCo. 2 points. Culture. Culture is no more than norms, values, beliefs, and practices. Culture will trump strategy any day. Norms, values, beliefs, and practices. The second point I would like to make is to your point. HACR, ELC, and all the nonprofits have to shift their mindset from it being an emotive approach to an economic approach. It's all about economics. And we have to learn how to use systems that will allow us to assess value creation. And Sid, you know this very well. When you create value in any enterprise, you now will get the attention of the power brokers who decide what is invested where and who gets how much. So shift from the motive aspects of feeling good and doing good. And believe me, as a black man, I love those emotive aspects. And being Rosito in this community, I love it even more so. But let's get real, people. For us to create a sea change, an S curve in the work that HACR is doing, that EOC is doing, that Catalyst is doing, we have to have metrics in place that assess value creation. Once we do that, we change the lexicon by which we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Because the point is, companies are getting tired of D&I, D&E lexicon. Let's change the language, let's change the metrics, let's change the outcomes.
Thanks, Ron, and I completely agree. It shouldn't just be about doing it because it's the right thing. It should be about doing it because it has an impact, and if that's the language that we have to use with companies, then let's do it. Let's change the language.
Thank you. AT&T has, practiced a couple of different things, trying to get the engagement, trying to get the funding in the right place. Initially, we had as ERGs dues by our own members. So they took the dues away and said, we'll pay the dues for you. So what did we as leadership in those ERGs do? Go get butts and seats and got more money. But the return wasn't there. So then AT&T said, okay, we need something for our investment. And that's when we went to community hours, and they're tracked on a corporate website. And now they pay us for the number of community hours that our members put in. So I tell my membership chair, don't give me a lot of people, give me a lot of working people, because that's what I ultimately need to get the number I need. And the thing is that I don't think that we alone can provide AT&T the value of what we have given. We can work with the organizations that we're working with, like LAA and the Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and such, to help us say, okay, we donated this, whether it's money, time, or in kind, what did we get in return? And we're starting to measure things like, how many, new contacts we made, what exposure did we give, advertising, and, how many people are attending. We're trying to get those metrics to give back to our D&I council, basically say, okay, how valuable is the money, or what return did we get on our investment? Going back to the gentleman's comment regarding getting that money and adding the value to the business. So it's not there yet as far as trying to determine what's the correct formula, but I understand what we're trying to achieve.
Right. Which I think is an important first step, right? Earlier I talked about how awful the numbers looked, but how excited that we actually were, because it was the first time that we'd gotten a majority of the companies to give us their procurement data. So there are certainly important first steps that we need to take along this journey, because it's not something that is just cut and dry. It's not something that will take a short time. I mean, it's definitely something that is going to take time.
I was going back to your thought about where you spoke to where we would go from here. And in my opinion, I hope we're all out of a job in 30 years because we've worked ourselves so hard to the point of equity where we don't need to have this conversation anymore, to be honest. But I guess my question is about the data and how we're holding corporations accountable to the numbers. And if we're providing recommendations following these reports, and then in a year from now saying, what improvements have you made upon these areas, whether it's about what we just discussed regarding metrics or how they hold their BRGs accountable or what have you. I just, the numbers are great. It's nice to have, but there's corporations that aren't consistently on these reports, consistently year in, year out. So how are we holding them accountable, saying that you're here and you're doing this regularly?
So that's a great question, and I think it's a step we've started to take. I don't by any means think we've achieved it perfectly yet, and I think we still have some work to do. But certainly, as part of the survey process, we conduct review calls with all of the participating companies. So we do a walkthrough of all of the different items. We talk about what things they were doing well, where there's opportunity for improvement, and as best as we can, when it's a situation where we have learned from another company about a best practice, we share those best practices. And because we've been doing this now for a couple of years, we're getting close to the point where we can see the impact of those conversations on their numbers. We're not quite there yet. I think it's going to take, there's always a lag between when a policy gets implemented or a change happens and then you actually see the effect on the particular outcome. But I think we're getting there, and it's certainly something that we've been very conscious of as an organization, especially as it comes to this tool. So we'll get there. We're just not quite there yet. So I know we're running close to the end of time. In fact, I'm not even really sure what time it is. I'm getting a stop. Okay, so let me just make 2 quick points, and that is, one point, and then I'll come to you, I promise. You'll be our last question. So this is our governance data, and I want to just point out that our sample of companies here in the survey tend to do much better on this measure than the Fortune 1 or 500 generally. If you look at representation more generally in terms of how many companies actually have Hispanics on their board in the larger Fortune 500, it is not 70%. So we have on this piece, it's hard for us to talk about the data because it is, you know, I don't want to say self-selection, that we're working with the companies who tend to know that there's value in diversifying their board. But certainly, our companies tend to do better on this measure than other companies do generally. So we'll take your comment, and this will be the last one because I'm getting the evil eye from the back.
But this is a good one because it relates to what the gentleman talked about in the back about adding value. So my name is Elaine Perez Bell, and I work for ADP. Human Capital Management Company, yes. So, Adelante, which is the name of our business resource group, I'm the director of operations for the group. We were challenged by Rita Mitchens, our chief diversity officer, to bring marketplace growth to the organization through our business resource group. And we had an Affordable Care Act webinar with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And up to today, and literally this was 2 or 3 days ago, we have generated $81,000 worth of revenue for the company as a direct result of that initiative. So when you're adding value, dollars and cents to the bottom line, that's when people start to pay attention. So I've got all the other BRGs knocking on my door. Please talk to me exactly how you did this. How do we do this? How do we? So, and we got the attention of the organization overall that, hey, a BRG isn't just about tostones and salsa. It's really adding value to the organization.
So thank you for that comment. I want to talk to you about it because Rita kind of told me a little bit about it, but I want to hear more in detail about it. So I think we're out of time for our session today. I hope you guys have found this productive and useful. I will be available in the hallway afterwards if anyone wants to ask some follow-up questions. And for those of you that I asked to see me after, if I could talk to you before the afternoon gets away from us so I could ask you a few questions about those programs, I'd appreciate it. Thank you again, everyone.
Oh, you can do better than that. Give a big round of applause to La Doctora, Dr. Lisette Garcia. You can see why we are so excited about what we're doing as we continue to develop and grow our HACR Research Institute. And we are putting some major power behind that. And with Dr. Lisette Garcia running our HACR Research Institute, I know you're going to see a lot of great data, insightful information to come.